Hey, so what exactly is IFC? I think a lot of you probably already know, but I'd like to introduce it. There are all kinds of interesting companies and organizations out there, and if there's something I recommend, like a school or something else, I want to share it with you. From now on, as Alpha, we'll keep recommending great career paths and schools and so on. I'd really like to keep recommending these to you, so I hope you'll find them helpful. So if you think, oh, that sounds interesting, I'd really encourage you to come to Alba as soon as possible and aim for that. That's what I'd like to ask of you. Okay, so now I'd like to explain a bit about why the IFC is actually pretty exciting. I'll keep it simple. First, let's talk about the World Bank Group. So it's the World Bank Group. Yes, it is an international organization that is extensively distributed across the entire world. And then Well, really, the main focus is financing for developing countries. And then in terms of industries, like, for example, agriculture, they're involved in a variety of fields like education and healthcare, especially in developing countries, for example, when it comes to agriculture. They work to further promote agriculture itself, even more so. They provide financing for agriculture, or they provide financing to improve healthcare environments. These kinds of practices are divided up. So it's like practice times country in that sense. Depending on your interests, for example, if you want to work in healthcare, you can do healthcare. If you want to work in agriculture, you can do agriculture. Of course, once you move up, you'll probably be involved in more integrated work, but basically, you can do what you want to do anywhere in the world. It's a truly global organization. When I was at Sumitomo Corporation working on project finance, of course, there were always discussions about how to utilize IFC loans, and that was really interesting. So, for people involved in what's called project finance, it's kind of like it's like climbing Everest. If you get the chance to participate in a project with the IFC, that would be an incredible boost for your career, right? So the people who actually end up joining IFC are, as you'd expect, really, yeah, since the work is interesting, almost nobody quits. Plus, the benefits are really, really good. I'll explain just how good they are a bit later. Honestly, once people join IFC, you hardly ever hear about anyone leaving. So it's a really comfortable place to work. Right. So about that, there are basically three main reasons. The pay is good, there's no income tax, and the benefits are world class. These three things are the big ones. And having an MBA is essential. Basically, that's a must. Plus, it's important to have an MBA from a top global school. Most people with MBAs are in their late 20s to 30s. So you can imagine that's the age group entering these positions. So, about that, what I'm trying to say is basically, so we're talking about the 115 to 165 range. If we're talking about MBA grad starting salaries, it's usually around the 130 range. But, you might think, isn't that kind of low? But from here on, the thing is, this isn't taxed. So basically, in reality, it's about $200,000. That's equivalent to a salary of about $200,000. In Japanese yen, that's roughly 30 million. So as a starting salary, or rather in your first year after getting your MBA, you can expect to make about this much. And since there's no tax at all, you don't pay anything. That's a huge benefit. So basically, it's just like working at an investment bank. Yeah. And then, well, actually, something that not a lot of people know is, yeah. So there's actually a lot of talk about how the employee benefits are really great. Of course, there are things like medical coverage, retirement pensions, relocation allowances, and moving expenses. But one of the biggest perks is the education allowance for your children, for your children's education. As you know, education in the US is pretty expensive. We're talking tens of thousands of dollars. It can cost 50 or $60,000, for example. But with this, you get support for those expenses. That's the kind of support we're talking about. There are also loan programs and things like that. So, to give you a concrete example, if you have two children, it usually costs around 80 to $100,000. You can get support for that. This is a really big deal. It's huge. And on top of covering 90%, you also have this kind of support. And what's more, you can go to those kinds of schools. Basically, you can attend the same schools that people in the IFC program are getting into. Naturally, the educational standards are also extremely high. So, for example, people working in finance in the US or those in finance who want to go to an MBA program in the US, of course, not just the US, but also Europe or even Asia, if you join the IFC, you can earn investment bank level salaries with no taxes. And with that kind of salary, plus investment banks don't offer things like childcare support or anything like that. They don't cover educational expenses for your kids or anything. So, in that sense, the IFC actually surpasses investment banks. As a career, people often come from investment banks, commercial banks, securities firms, insurance companies, or even from corporate roles. A lot of people have backgrounds in accounting or finance and then went on to get an MBA. So the IFC is a place where those kinds of people go as a post MBA career move. It's not somewhere that fresh graduates can just jump into. That's why you can basically assume that IFC recruiters are looking for top tier MBA graduates. And as for the salary, well, it's pretty much as I mentioned earlier. Yeah. And about the YPP, oh, right, the entry point idea. That's a good one. Yeah, we can move on to the next part. Well, just a bit. Oh, sorry. Let's go ahead. So at the analyst level, it's about $100,000, and at the MBA level, it's around 130,000 to 150,000. And for a senior investment officer, it's $200,000, and when you get to the lead manager class, it goes over $250,000. Once you become a director, it goes up to 300 or even $400,000. So I think the salary level is more than sufficient. And on top of that, there's no tax.
If you join with an MBA, do you start from the analyst level?
No, it's actually from the second level here, the yellow section. This YPP stands for Young Professional Program, I think. Basically, you enter through that. So you do an internship. It's just like with investment banks. So you do an internship, a summer internship, and if you do well, entering through this YPP is one of the typical paths. Yes, that's how it goes. Yeah, it's kind of the same process as investment banks. Most people come from investment banks, or, like I mentioned earlier, people who have worked at financial institutions or in accounting and finance. So during the summer, those people, they intern at SOFC and then they get an offer directly from there. That process really isn't much different from investment banks. Yeah. And then, wow. Well, no, as it says here, the entry point, as I mentioned earlier, is basically for people who, unless they have a really unique background, like, for example, someone who has already worked at another bank doing profiling, or someone who has experience in investment banking, PE, or consulting. Well, there are some positions you can enter directly, but for international candidates, the basic route is through an overseas MBA, this so called 02 path. It's the internship program, right? You go through the global internship program, and if you do well, you move on to the so called 01 Young Professionals program. That's the general flow of how it works. So that's how it is. Well, as I mentioned earlier, the process isn't really any different from that of foreign financial institutions. And as is often the case, since this is a program where you can work in the US as is, we often get people coming to us through things like the Fulbright program, asking for scholarships or some kind of support. People say things like, I want to work in the US in the future, or something like that. There are also people who say they want to work at the IFC, but with the Fulbright program, basically, you have to come back, right?
That's right. There's a 2-year home residency requirement. So I don't think you can just go work overseas right away.
There are actually quite a few people like that. So honestly, I tell them maybe it's better not to go for it. Fulbright is a good program, but in the end, you have to come back to Japan because of the return requirement. So, with that in mind, we just say, for now, let's try. And if we support you, you might even be able to get scholarships and such. With things like Fulbright, I've almost never made a mistake. Yeah, well, even if you get accepted, in the end, the return requirement means you have to come back to Japan. You have to do it. The moment you finish your MBA, you have to come back to Japan. And there are people who, after going to summer internships through the IFC and getting good job offers, end up having to return to Japan just because they received a Fulbright. And as a result, they lose out on IFC opportunities. There are actually quite a few people like that. So I think it's better not to worry too much about short term money, especially for those aiming for places like the IFC. In that area, the experiences of those who came before you are actually quite valuable. Yeah, well, Alpha has a lot of experience with that kind of uncertainty and hesitation. So feel free to ask us about it. Okay. So when it comes to which schools are considered target schools, IFC is basically in the same position as investment banks. So places like Wharton, Chicago, and Columbia are definitely strong. And then there are the so called general schools like HBS, Stanford, Kellogg, and Tuck. And then there's INSAD, LBS, IMD, and so on. Honestly, you can also get in from places like Hong Kong or even Singapore, no problem at all. But people with a finance background are definitely strong candidates, like those who originally worked at banks, securities firms, or insurance companies. Accounting and finance, too. Well, like me, if I wanted to, probably. As for me, I was at a trading company, or rather a general trading firm. Since I was doing project finance in the finance department and went to Chicago for my MBA, I feel like I could have joined the IFC right away, like some of my classmates did.
So after a year, is it not always necessary to go through that route?
It's not that you always have to go through it. If you already have an MBA and experience in investment banking, for example. And for people who don't have any particular issues with English, I think you can apply to the IFC from Japan as well. Also, when it comes to complex financial transactions, such as mergers and acquisitions, or project finance, or even the various types of detailed financial projections involved in these deals, if you haven't really done those kinds of things, like M&A, for example, I think there are also people who haven't really practiced those things. But if that's the case, it's pretty important to get into a top finance school like Wharton, Chicago, or Columbia, and make sure you can properly build things like valuation and cash flow models. Yeah, most people actually do have that kind of experience. Right. It's not like you absolutely have to go into investment banking to get in. I mean, there are all sorts of different departments. Uh,
That's true. You're right.
So there are also departments that focus on things like data science.
Right. In that case, it's not necessarily about M&A or anything like that.
Yeah, exactly. So really, there are all kinds of departments. And depending on your strengths, you might be able to find a place where you can really fit in. Yes, please feel free to consult with Alpha. Really. Yeah. Actually, I've talked with people from IFC's HR before, and they said they'd really like to see more people from Japan apply. Yes, I think it could be interesting to return to Japan and work in investment banking or something like that. But if you do that, it becomes pretty tough to go back to the US again, for example, unless they sponsor your visa and all that. And then, there are things like your family or your kids to consider. They'll even cover all your kids' school expenses and everything. It's the same as with investment banks. And you get a salary too. So it's pretty much the best, right? Plus, you get to contribute to global finance. And since a lot of the financing is aimed at developing countries, I think people from trading companies or major banks would be a great fit. People with that kind of mindset. Also, people who have done manufacturer design or who have worked in project finance or those who are in investment banking or IBD, I think they'd be a great fit too. And people from accounting firms as well. If you're from that kind of background and you're interested in financing for developing countries, I think you find this really interesting. If you just type in IFC, you'll find it right away. The website will come up. Could you maybe pull up the IFC page? Ah, thank you very much. Yes, this is it. This is the IFC's Japanese website, but it looks like this. Would you mind taking a look at the business overview and such? Wouldn't it be better to use the English version? Ah, yes, yes. Thank you. Oh, with this? Yeah, like private sector and so on. Oh, is it the one all the way to the right? Something like agri? Agribusiness and forestry, for example. There's also education. And then there's financial institutions, funds, health, infrastructure, and so on. So it's pretty much divided by sector, like manufacturing and so on. And then as a cross section, if you move a little to the left, yes, right there. In terms of priorities, there are themes like climate business, conflict, gender, private capital, and sustainability. That's how it's written here. Yes. So, everyone, please make sure to check out the IFC website. I think there are quite a few people who are interested. Plus, you can work in the US, not just in the US, but all over the world. You can work anywhere in the world. And, well, it's part of the World Bank Group. Yes, the work itself is excellent. And I think it's a really interesting job where you can contribute to different local communities. The salary and benefits are great too. The salary is tax free. It's amazing that it's tax free. You know how it usually feels like so much gets taken out of your paycheck, right? No tax and more. And it's full of benefits, right? This is pretty rare, you know? I really think it's a good option for everyone. Yeah. All right. So, with that said, well, I actually haven't talked that much about FC until now. A lot of people with a good nose for these things have actually come to Alpha, and some of them say they're interested in IFC. Also, at MBA kickoff meetings and such, I often talk with everyone about their long term goals. As we discuss what everyone has done so far and what they want to do, sometimes I realize, hey, maybe that's actually iPhone related. And we end up talking about that. And then some people are like, oh, yeah, that's true. So, yeah. You get to work in America. You can work in America or anywhere in the world. And on top of that, it's with the World Bank Group. It's not often you get the chance to work under someone like Kasama. Like I mentioned earlier, it's actually pretty rare to have a situation where, while staying in your own country, say you're in Japan or another country, even on assignment, and then suddenly you get a visa to go to America. Opportunities like this don't come around often.
Yeah, usually once you go back to your home country, it's really tough to get a US work visa again. It's pretty tough, isn't it?
Yeah, it's really hard, right? So, if you're thinking, I want to work in America, for example, you get your MBA overseas and then you go back to your home country. And for people who are already working, there's still opportunities. Absolutely. And that means instead of going through something like a summer internship, like direct hiring, you can apply directly to those YPP programs without having to go through the internship programs. That's right. So there are all kinds of options. Yeah. So people who have already gotten their MBA still have plenty of opportunities, even if they've already graduated. In fact, you can even connect with HR at places like the so called 5 Cs. So if you're interested, definitely look into it. For those who don't have an MBA yet, the first step is to get one. But if you already have an MBA and are interested in the IFC, we even offer career change support. So if you're interested in the IFC, it's a job where you can help make the world a better place. It's pretty exciting, isn't it? This is really something.
Yeah, that's right. Especially like DJ mentioned earlier. If you've already been working in accounting or finance or have that kind of profile and you've done it on a global scale, honestly, there are probably a lot of people who are at the top of their field or who can do that kind of work. And when they hear about it, they're like, wow, that sounds really interesting. Of course, there are also people who are personally interested in IOC and want to go in that direction. And as we talk, there are quite a few people who realize, oh, that's a possible career path and start to see that as an option. So, when we're discussing post MBA or MBA careers, these kinds of career paths start to come into view. Finding exactly what you want to do, and on top of that, having the best possible conditions, that's really the ideal situation, isn't it?
Yeah, that's really true. So, well, of course, working at an investment bank is exciting, and so is working at a PE fund. But, for some people, maybe they're looking for something a bit more like social? Not just hardcore capitalism, but, wanting to do something good for the world. Of course, PE funds and the like are doing good things too, but how should I put it? Some people, on a personal level, want to focus on things like developing countries. So, something like combining developing countries, finance, and an MBA, it's really, you can have that kind of exciting match. And sorry to repeat myself, but the salary's good, the benefits are good. You can work in places like the US, and you can even bring your kids with you. It's pretty great. And even people who already have an MBA have a chance. So please ask us how to do it. Ask Alpha. Yes.